So my question is, what fills your heart? Mine's going to be filled with different things than yours, and some things that are the same, but in different ways. And so I can't tell you what fills your heart, but you know very well, and you know that often it's just so much that it'd be very hard to describe all of it. So let's just kind of focus in a little bit. So maybe it's something in your garden. Perhaps it's dahlias or cornflowers. Maybe it's a hummingbird or honeysuckle. For me, I know it's roses and tulips and lilacs. There's just so many things. It's hard to narrow down sometimes. And our heart really isn't shaped like a heart. It's shaped more like this kidney bean. So I don't know where the symbol itself came from, but I do know that flowers have certain attributes attributed to them, and the Victorian had a whole science or a category of knowledge called floriography. And so often a bouquet would be made comprised of certain flowers because those flowers were designated as messengers of love. For instance, a daisy is the flower of purity, and plumeria the flower of spring and new beginnings. A sunflower is lasting happiness, and of course a rose is also not only remembrance but love. A dahlia stands for elegance and love. So using some of those elements, we could create a bouquet and fill our heart up with that. Mary Oliver suggests that you need to keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable. We created these beautiful watery backgrounds, heart-shaped, that we can now put some artwork on top of. And because the number of ways that you can fill your heart and the things that you could put in is so vast, we're going to try and focus in. Maybe even it would be a wonderful practice to fill your heart each day with something. So if you have 6 of these, for instance, you've got almost a week's worth of a gratitude journal, so to speak. So one of the things for me in this dark and dreary time of the seasons is that I look to is the beginning and blossoming of cherry blossoms. And so that's what I'll put in this heart. I have some other ideas for these. I often go out and find ideas and inspiration and then come back and utilize some of what I saw when I was out scrolling around on Pinterest or Etsy or Unsplash or what have you. I bring those images back in my mind and figure out a way for me to say a similar thing. I went out to Unsplash and found some beautiful images of each of the flowers we just talked about that actually are designated as messengers of love. And I have those on hand to use in some of these hearts. And so, for instance, I was thinking that it would be beautiful to have a rose and these tulips coming out of this heart. And for this one, I wanted to use these bleeding hearts because there's such a similar palette. So sometimes our designs are guided by the background that we started with. And we don't always start with background. Sometimes we start with the image and put a background in. We just happen to have done the reverse in this instance. So looking at this, I think of a very delicate bouquet of, say, maybe these cornflowers, or something like the apple blossoms, or magnolias or something. This one, when I look at it, looks very oriental to me, actually, but it also has sort of a little bit of whimsy about it. And so I would probably do black and white line art and have it be more, not cartoony, but more whimsical. This one definitely looks very delicate and would be beautiful with not a highly rendered rose, but one that you could at least tell that it was a rose, as is this one with the cherry blossoms. But your mind would probably go in different directions, and that's up to you to decide what to put in your heart and what to fill your heart with and what already fills your heart. I have a page started here in my own sketchbook. I absolutely love my sweet peas, and I've actually started them already. The seedlings are up in my sunroom, trying to get their little bodies strong enough to be planted when the frost goes away. So I took the seed packets and the names of each of the different types of sweet peas I'm going to plant and put those inside the heart. There was no background in this case. I just filled them in with the painting of the sweet peas. In this case, this particular heart, the way that the colors flowed and things dripped, and it just looked like it just needed a little bit of something delicate. Again, maybe some sort of a orange blossom or cherry blossom, maybe a rose. This one for sure needs lilacs. I have the most beautiful image of a lilac that I think would work beautifully right there. And then in this case, I found an old poem inside of an ancient book about a proposal by Bayard Taylor. And, you know, while the words are lovely, it's not so much about the words, it's that's in the background. And then I'm going to draw this heart, an anatomical drawing right on top of it, either in ink or I'm thinking possibly pencil. And then having the only color on it be some sort of a flower. So those are some of my ideas. But for today, let's just take one of them. You could also use little note cards or greeting cards, and in the same way create these little hearts, very watery like we did in our project. And then you could either just write I love you, or put some sort of a little line drawing. I have some ideas for these as well. But again, these are meant to be something that will trigger something in your mind that you want to capture in your heart. I have on my iPad a couple of images of cherry blossoms, and I'm going to mask off the rest of these because I'm very sloppy when I paint and I don't want to mess those up. I also, before I go very much further, I could do this freehand, and because I want it to be loose and not particularly realistic. But if you were not as confident about doing that and that was going to inhibit you in any way, I don't want that to happen, so you could draw it on. I will include this reference in case you do want to do cherry blossoms, as well as one other, and in the resources. You could take that and print it out and trace it and then scribble on the back with the pencil like this with graphite to make it as, on the back side, it'll make it so that you can trace with it, flip it back over, and then I use a really fine point ballpoint pen. This one's got a much finer point to it than most, to then carefully draw it on. Or you could just sketch it on with a 2H pencil, just very lightly. You just don't want those pencil lines to show up very much. And I'm really only going to use one or two colors, probably opera rose and or alizarin crimson and a little bit of white gouache if needed. And I'm just going to make it very loose and loose and free. I'm going to have two paint brushes. This one's a Princeton long round, size 8. It's awfully large for this small of an area, but in case I need to wet an area, as well as a finer one. And so I also have, this is a Faber-Castell number 6. It's a nice round brush as well, and also a little bit big. And then two smaller, one Anna Mason triple aught and then a Princeton round 0. Those are for the little tiny fine limbs you see. And so I'm just going to get started here, mix up some opera rose and do my, just use my watercolors to make a really light, watery, washy rendering of those cherry blossoms. I might want to blow them up a little bit so I can see how they're shaped. In the instances where I'm landing on top of something that's quite dark, I'm going to work with a little tiny bit of opaque watercolor gouache, some white, and just see if I can soften some of the effect of that. I'll just go ahead and do that in a couple places here where it's quite dark. And in some cases, I can define the shape. When it's pink against pink like that, I can come in and define the shape a little clearer by going around the outside edge of it with some of the greens for indicating that there's leaves, or pick up some of the colors I see in the surrounding area already. And that'll define those petals that are pink against pink a little better. I don't really need to go to a lot of effort here. I'm just trying to indicate that there's blossoms in here. Without losing the beauty, the spontaneity of that background. And then the gouache sometimes takes multiple layers, so once this first layer is more dry, I can add more, but that application there just about got me where I need it to be. So I'm just going to define a few more of these blossoms a little better, and then I'll work on putting in some branches, and that might be all I need to do in here. I'm going to let that first layer of subtle pinks and whites dry. I've outlined some of the areas a little more to define the white or the pale petals against the pink. I'll soften that, and then I think I'd like to start to put in some of the more of the leaves and the branches. I have to do that with caution because I don't want to have that hit any of the wet white and light blossoms and then travel. But I want to at least start to get that in. I think I'll just use a little burnt sienna and indigo and some water to sort of let those two colors blend together to give me my darkest dark. So I'll get that mixed up. I want it to be fairly thick, not super watery paint because I don't want it to I don't really want it to travel. And so for the darkest parts, I can use almost straight indigo with just a little burnt sienna in it. And then lighter areas will be just a little more burnt sienna. And there's just some very fine, delicate work that could be done back here. Just to indicate that this is a tree. Sort of hit or miss, very light pressure, not necessarily light in tone. And you see I just picked up a little more burnt sienna in that instance. And the branches have little budlets coming off here and there as well. Just meant to be very delicate and just sort of hinted out. I'm not going to be particularly expressive or realistic in my attempt here to get those branches in. Just sort of indicating, hinting at the fact that that is a tree. And see, there I'm running into a petal and it's wet, and so I have to stay out of that because it wanted to travel into those lighter blossom petals. And I really don't want this to take but a few minutes. This is just, if it's going to become a daily practice, I want to be able to have it be achievable, something I can do in a matter of a few minutes each day. Just come in and do one of these little hearts, remind myself that how grateful I am for certain aspects of what surrounds me, all the beauty that surrounds me. I'm going to put this branch on. This is sort of the main branch. I'm going to put it on with water first and then sort of drop in some color so it's more mottled, matching the background here. Because I'm using a little tiny brush that doesn't carry much water, so I have to keep going back and picking up more and more. And I want it to kind of define, the branch to kind of define this one outer edge right here, loosely, sort of appear and disappear. And it'll become more evident here when I put some color on. I'm going to start with just straight indigo and drop it in where it's wet and see how if it bleeds in the manner that I'm expecting it to. There we go. Just sort of touch it and it just travels, and I'll add a little of that burnt sienna here and there as well. There, it's subtle. It's understated. That's the words I'm looking for. Understated and understood. Very delicate. There's a big drop of water right there, which will make that branch travel if it doesn't dry quickly. And then I think that I'm happy with that branch, and I'm just going to let it be. I do want to have it come appear and disappear over here a little bit so it defines the rest of the branch on that side and behind that flower. So I don't want it to get into that flower, but I do want it to look as though it tucks behind it and continues on up. And I'll let those dry now. And soon these other flowers will be dry enough that I can come back and put the centers in and a few more leaves, and then I'll be done. This is dry again, and I'm going to come back in now with a little bit of sap green and a little bit of green gold. I realize that's off camera. See if I can turn this so you can see a little bit of sap green and a little bit of green gold. And I'm going to just put a few more leaves in here, just a couple. I'm letting my brush do the work for me, really. Just kind of starting with a little pressure, pushing down and then letting off. Of course, it'd be good if there was paint on it, but by doing so, it gets a petal-shaped leaf with very little effort. And they don't need to be everywhere, but I am noticing that on the reference image, wherever there's one of these little budlets, in some cases there is a leaf trying to happen. A baby leaf. So we'll put a few of those on here. Just a couple more here and there. And I've been making little dots here and there with each color as I use it. I don't like to have them be so uniform, so it might be better to splatter. So if I cover up this up here, I can splatter safely a little bit with the green. Maybe. And then I think it's time now, with everything fairly dry, to really go in and put those final details in. And they have these little stamen that come out of each petal. And it's not always it's not always something you can really see that well. Let's see if I can get my image up on my iPad again. So they have little stamens that come out of the very centers. And so I'm going to try to do a little bit of that, but not a lot. It doesn't need to be on every flower. And so there may be a little combination of the green and the pink to neutralize that a little bit, to make the little stems that come up out of some of them. And not every one of them needs it. And some of them just need little tiny dots. And you could probably do that with a colored pencil too if you wanted to. But prior to that, I want to put a little more detail into some of the centers. I think I'll use this quinacridone magenta for that, just to make it more obvious that those are petals and flowers. But remembering that these are meant to be loose I'm just kind of redefining some of them by lightening them up a little bit when they're up against something too similar in color, just with a little drop of white gouache here and there. And it sort of pops them and brings them forward a little bit better. So the ones in the very far front should be the whitest and lightest and brightest, of course. I just don't want to take it too very much further. And now back to that idea of putting in some of the little dots from this for the stamen. Some of these are too wet again to do that too, but we can do that right down here, for instance. And just kind of circling that center with a few of the stamen dots. I may not even put in the little lines. I think that might be too much on such a small little card and with so little detail. And where it's wet, it's traveling too much, so you have to stay out of that area. And so I think it's time to let things dry again. A little bit more spattering here. Very delicate amount, and it's just sort of hinting at what's there. It kind of goes in and fades out, and some areas will need to pop a little more, but it'll also need to dry a little bit more before we can really do much of that. But I do think that I'll actually develop these two into more of a blossom, and I can do that by just putting a little bit of gouache in there and activate the pink that I already have. Using my gouache straight from the tube, sometimes that helps really define and pop those petals out, particularly in the places where they're really close to the same color as the background. Now they'll stand out better. You could use color pencil on these. You could do line art and loose a little bit of color from watercolor or marker or anything else on top of it. It's pretty wide open as to how to fill yours in. I'm hoping that this quick little demonstration shows you one way. But mostly I just hope that this can become a daily practice for you. Just a little bit of gratitude for all those things that fill your heart. Thank you for joining me today. Hope to see you again soon.